everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Charity Trustees Subcommittee of the Council. My apologies for the slightly delayed start, whilst we've been ironing out one or two admin type issues. The meeting's open to the public. There are some restricted items which we'll come on to. We've received 3 public questions and 1 petition. Please can I request that mobile telephones and other such equipment are switched to silent mode so as not to disturb the conduct of the meeting. There is no fire test planned for today. If there is an emergency evacuation, please take instructions from the town hall staff. The assembly point is in Tudor Square. For the benefit of the webcast, ask each Charity Trustee Subcommittee member in turn to introduce themselves. So I am Councillor Ian Auckland, I am a Councillor for Graves Park Ward, and I am Chair of this committee. And we'll just go around Sarah and then we'll go through the members, aren't we?
Thank you, Chair. I'm Sarah Bennett. I'm Assistant Director of Legal Services, and here is the Monitoring Officer's representative today.
Fran Belbin, Councillor for Firth Park Ward, Deputy Leader. The Darnell Ward.
Shall I go first? Yeah. Douglas Johnson, Councillor for City Wards, Chair of Housing.
Good afternoon. Richard Williams, Councillor for Stannington Ward.
Jo Pierce, Service Manager within the Parks and Countryside Service.
Hi, and I'm Lisa Firth. I'm Director of Parks, Leisure and Libraries.
Do we have any apologies for absence? No, everybody's here. Exclusion of press and public. Now, there are a number of items that have got restrictions on, and it's quite a lot. And I was a little bit thrown by the fact that there was 272 pages in the restricted pack, and just before I checked, well, same number of pages in the public part of the agenda, which surprised me. But a lot of the pages in the public agenda are marked essentially blank or leave. Now, we're talking about a park charity, we're talking about a community interest company where the profits will be, if any, will be distributed to good causes in Hillsborough. I think it's fair to say the council has got into some difficulties over contract details and agreements for publication latterly. So I'd just like to ask whoever is the relevant officer that they're satisfied that we are putting in the public domain everything that we should be able to put in the public domain. And it was a question that members raised at the briefing stage for this paper today. So if somebody could give us assurance on that. And then for the purposes of getting us hopefully to a conclusion today, I'm not going to go with, I don't intend, unless to go over everything that's restricted again. But can I ask members, if we want to discuss something that's restricted, obviously we have to exclude the public. Don't really want to do that.
Yes, Chair.
Yeah.
All reports are checked off by a number of professional officers, including legal services. This report was checked by a member of the team who have confirmed that sections can be closed for reasons of needing to be exempt, I think primarily for commercial sensitivity. So that check was done, Chair. It's always our priority to release as much information as possible.
Are we happy with that for now? Yeah. Thank you. Sorry.
Just one. Are we still sure that even the visuals are still closed?
The visual in here has remained closed, but that visual's been shared publicly within kind of consultation that's been done recently, so it has been in the public domain more widely than it was previously.
I mean, I'm just thinking, does that mean it's not actually closed?
It stayed in there as exempt, but actually it's in the public domain now, so arguably that one could be made not exempt.
Could we, I mean, it would just be much easier if people can see the visuals. Can we do that? Any legal objection?
No, Chair, if the status of that document's been changed since the report was signed off for the previous meeting, then there's no reason why that couldn't be made available to the public.
That's fine.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Item 4, appointment of Deputy Chair. All right, it says, to note that at the meeting of the Strategy and Resources Policy Committee on Wednesday 31st of May 2023, Councillor Zahir Naz was appointed as Deputy Chair of the Charity Trustee SubCommittee. So I'm just notifying members of that state and welcome to Councillor Naz. Item 5, minutes, to approve the minutes of the meeting of the Charity Trustee Subcommittee on 21st of March 2023. There are only 2 members who were present on that committee meeting. I'm told, somebody told me a long time ago, it wasn't necessary for anyone to be actually there before you approve the minutes, but I think over to Councillor Williams and Councillor Johnson for that bit.
Yeah, I think they're accurate as far as I can tell, in the sense I've not spotted any inaccuracies. Having said that, there is one question to say a full written response be provided in response to some of the written questions, and I want to ask if that was ever done. So it's a matter arising rather than an accuracy point.
To my knowledge, they have, but I'll double check them and I'll be able to post, I will be able to publish them, the questions and the responses on the website.
Okay, thanks. That would be appreciated. So there's a proper record there. Thanks.
With that, members, are the minutes agreed? Yep. And with that only matter arising, that's been taken care of. Okay. Not off to a good start. Item 3, declarations of interest. Has any member got anything to declare? No. Okay. Public questions and petitions. The public questions and petitions that I've got in front of me basically refer to the item 8 on the agenda, and we've got somebody to present the petition, and the questioners are here, and I think the ward councillor wants to speak. Henry? Yeah, okay. So what I would suggest is that we actually we take the work programme at the end.
Yeah, should we take the petition?
Yeah, and we'll take the petition first. According to the petition scheme, you've got 3 minutes to speak, but I think we can afford to take quite a bit of latitude there to speak in support. Taking liberties, what I think, if you could help us with, is there a sort of an area for agreement? Thank you so much for providing a lot of documentation and commentary, for organising a petition and for presenting it today. But as I say, as well as telling us about the petition, if you feel that there is some areas of agreement between the petitioner and what's before us today and council officers, or scope for that, I think we'd be interested, I think I'd be interested in that at any rate. Over to you. Yeah, would you mind stepping forward to the microphone? Very familiar, you press a button. Yeah.
Right, thank you. I'd like to give our apologies for some members of Friends of Hillsborough Park who are actually attending a funeral of one of our long-term volunteers. Given that we are both here and not there, we'd just like to say Alvin Hera, gentleman, long-term supporter and friend of Hillsborough Park, shukriya, and hope I've got that right. On to the petition, which you've got a copy of already, I believe. The Friends of Hillsborough Park wish to submit their petition hosted on change.org, asking the Charity Trustee SubCommittee to ensure that the multi-use games area is not reduced to a third of its current size, as it appears to be on the plans for the Hillsborough Park Activity Hub that we've seen. Drawings of the scheme are within the restricted document submitted to the committee, but we believe the intention is to reduce its current size to a third of its current size and to fully enclose it. To date, 1,206 people have signed the petition, and we believe it is quite fairly and simply stated. And I'll read it. Hillsborough Park's Mugger multi-use games area is a large area of flat ground adjacent to the 4 tennis courts near the car park, the new skate park and Penistone Road. Currently, it is free of charge, easily accessible, popular and well-used area of our local park, enjoyed by many members of the community as well as various local charitable groups, such as Cycling for All. As part of a proposed activity of development in Hillsborough Park, Sheffield City Council intend to significantly alter the existing Mugger, reducing its size significantly, enclosing it with fencing and making parts of the new area chargeable. The Friends of Hillsborough Park understand that the plan is to move 3 tennis courts onto the current Mugger, build paddle tennis courts, build a new cafe and welfare building, and create a much smaller and fully enclosed Mugger on the site of the current tennis courts. The objective of the Activity Hub is to create enough income from pay-to-use activities at Hillsborough to maintain all of the park's tennis sites across the city. This development of a public green space will drastically reduce the free-to-use area, and we believe it will disadvantage those people who currently use the Mugger. The new enclosed Mugger will be much smaller and less easier to enter and leave. We believe that moving the tennis courts is designed to facilitate easier access for tram lines, equipment and setup, and we believe it is a poor use of council funds. We believe that this commercialisation of a public park with little regard for those people in Hillsborough community who currently use the Mugger for free. With the current cost of living crisis, families and communities struggling with high energy bills and high demand for food banks, we believe that these plans will leave the community worse off. As park users and stakeholders, your voice counts. The council must listen to local people who love and use Hillsborough Park all year round. And if you are a user of the Mugger and agree with us, we would kindly ask you to sign the petition. So that is the wording of the petition that we've put out. There are also 101 comments of support focusing on keeping the free-to-use space and questioning the need for a second cafe in the park. While we disagree with the conclusions presented to the committees and some of the methods of the council consultations about the Mugger and the Activity Hub, the view in those consultations consistently comes across that a big open plan Mugger is a popular amenity in the park. So, in the Hillsborough Forward plan, the size and openness of the Mugger was specifically mentioned in 2 stakeholder sessions, and 171 out of 239 people rated the Mugger as okay or better than okay. In the Activity Hub consultation, 230 people out of 356 rated the Mugger as okay or better than okay, and there were 211 comments about it which were not shared with the Friends of Hillsborough Park. At this point, I would also draw the committee's attention to the Parks Tennis report on the Yorkshire Tennis website and Twitter feed, which asked people to complete the survey and said, the current multi-use games area will be resurfaced and floodlit and will remain free for casual use, as it is today, as is the case today. And in this survey, 138 people out of 607 respondents said they wanted the park for tennis. In the Young People's questionnaire, 37 people, or 25% of those young people who commented about what they liked about the Mugger, specifically said that it was its size and openness. At this point, I would also draw the committee's attention to the questionnaires wording about, quote, making the large tarmac area a bit smaller and, quote, these activities cost money to do them and would help us raise money to look after the park. I would also draw their attention to the graphics, which make the proposed Mugger look the same size as 3 tennis courts and show the existing arrangement as a very greyed out image. Finally, I've confirmed with the Friends of Millhouses Park, Crooksmoor Parks, Concord Park and Bingham Park Community Group, who do not know about the 25-year leases. Still await an answer from Graves and High Hazels. Perhaps the officers will clarify the statement for all the outdoor tennis court sites that form part of this. Key site stakeholders have been informed about the proposed changes to the tennis management arrangements. In summary, therefore, we believe that the Friends of Hillsborough Park have conducted a fair and impartial petition. We have also provided briefings to this committee which clarify or clearly set out our reasons for opposing the current plan. We were also informed recently that there is not currently a viable solution in place for cycling for all. In view of the general public and young people's support for a large open Mugger, we therefore petition the committee to refuse the current activity hub plan.
Thank you for presenting the petition and the amount of work that you've put in, and thank the people who've signed it. Is there a response from officers at this point? And then I'll go to members. There were some specific questions raised.
Yeah, no, not the response to all those questions. We'd not had sight of those. We were aware of the petition. We've responded to the questions that were submitted.
Okay, and the bit about other friends groups and charities?
We're all made aware. They have been made. We have contacted friends of groups and local councils for all the sites.
Happy to share the emails.
Okay. Right. And
Sorry, Chair, I think it would be appropriate if we had time to pull information together to respond to some of the questions that Joe and the team had not had sight of prior. So we could give, you know, some verbal updates. Joe has made all the parks that have been mentioned aware and the friends of groups aware, and we aren't fundamentally changing the operating model for tennis. That was agreed in 2017, but there are emails and supporting documents that we can provide to you, Chair, and to the committee that would provide answers to the questions.
And most importantly to the
Friends of Hillsborough Park, yeah.
And other groups, because we will get the emails where people say, no, nothing about this. Okay. Over to members, really. Have members got any comments to make beyond my grateful thanks and the fact that we've, I think, noted the work that they've put into this? Councillor Belbin.
I'd just like to thank the friends for welcoming me to go and visit the park and see some of the facilities for themselves and raising some of the issues that I got a much better understanding, I think, from going out and seeing the issues in the park. It was somewhat unfortunate, I think, that the Arctic monkeys were in the process of setting up, which did demonstrate some of the limitations for local people of using the park at the moment. So I did get a really good understanding through that, I think, of the way that it can start to feel as if these decisions are being taken away from people. So thank you anyway for your hospitality there.
So, we've got some questions.
Sorry, Chair.
Sorry.
So I'm just thinking, where does that leave us? I mean, I think as members, we've been told that there's a number of questions that have been raised there. I assume that they've gone to officers too, but obviously not. Kind of feel we're left hanging without some answers to some fairly fundamental questions. So I'm just thinking how we take this forward.
I think we have answers and updates since the last committee meeting and further information. There are just some points in the Friends of questions there that we can't put our hands on specifically now, but Joe has brought an update for yourselves and for the Friends to provide since the last meeting in March.
So Councillor Johnson, one of the things that struck me wrestling with this is we've been asked to make decisions about quite a number of charitable lands that we have as trustees in the parks portfolio. And quite honestly, these are places, I mean, I visited Hillsborough Park, as I said, the other day and had a good look round. That's the second time probably I've set foot there for 30 odd years. On Grace Park, I've got a copy of the conveyances and the scheme that the Charity Commission made, and I'm aware of their opinion, which is not favourable, of letting off charitable parkland for a 25-year term. So in that sense, I know. I don't know about the other places. One of the things I've committed to doing is to actually, I've asked for copies of the scheme of arrangements or the governing documents for each of the parks, because they might be different. I'd like to know a little bit about how they came into our hands and on what conditions, if any, were attached to it. I think I certainly should go and visit them. I extend an invitation to my colleagues to go. From our own informal discussions, I think we'd like some training as well as to what it means to be a charitable trustee and what difference it makes to be a local authority, because I've had some interesting discussions. Apparently the council, in the legal sense, can't be two-faced. Politically, who knows, but apparently legally we can't be two-faced. So, lots of questions. My only point would be, in a way, we could say, right, we haven't got answers to these questions, we'll defer it. Fairness to officers, they've worked at this for good or ill in changing circumstances politically, and they're anxious to secure it. I think that given the procedure that's been recommended to us, we don't necessarily lose anything by accepting that we may decide to give notice, but officers need to understand that's powerful. That's a powerful check on, as far as I understand, we think as members, that's a powerful check on what we might do next. It's not just a blank check to go ahead and do what you want to do. So on that basis, with all that I've said, I sort of feel we can at least get to the end of this meeting, subject to, how I get on. So, Councillor Johnson, what do you feel about? Do you feel content?
Yeah, I'm not sure we've got really all the information we need to make a proper decision as charity, as trustees of the charity, in each of the cases. But I know that the officers, said that they've got verbal updates. The big thing really is about, we had a long discussion at the meeting in March. We deferred it then. only 2 members have survived of the committee since then, but it's come back now, and I was very much hoping that it would be wrapped up in the sense that all the disputes have been resolved. And I think I'm just concerned that, you know, we're in a situation where we're saying as a council, we're offering something that's an upgrade, and the people who use the park are saying, no, we don't like this is not an upgrade in our view. But whether officers will have some response to that. I'm slightly concerned it's still all verbal at the moment, but maybe we just need to hear that, and then we can have the discussion about where we go with this.
Lisa.
Thank you. I believe that a report has been submitted with responses to what's happened since March. So the additional consultation that the team has carried out in Hillsborough Park, I believe there is a report that has been submitted for this meeting. So it's not all verbal. Sorry, when I said verbal, I was referring to some additional questions that have come up today that I can give a verbal response for, but I would prefer to submit them in writing. But there is a report that's been submitted with papers today, I believe.
Yeah. It might be helpful if we, I think a number of the bits that I will update on would address some of Andy, Christine and Janet's points from the Friends of group, not all, and as Lisa says, we can refer back to them, but if I could, when we get to that point of the agenda, if I can kind of give you that update, that might help answer some of those.
Since I'm going to bring Richard in, Councillor Williams, but since that report was published and your extra bits in page 219 to wherever it is in the report in here, basically the cycle people have come and said, well, we're not quite there yet, which we've had that in writing. Now, Richard, Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I would find it really useful. I was at with Douglas, I was here at the last meeting. I would find it really useful, and I'm sure others would as well, to get an update from the officers about what's changed since March, both in the document, to make sure I haven't missed anything, but also if you've got any further verbal updates. I just think that would be really useful at this stage.
We have some questions. Do people wish to put the questions?
I don't think so.
No, no. Okay. We can give a response which might come out in the debate. Councillor Nottage, you want to make some observations?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say, as a ward councillor, thank you for the officers for their time putting the proposals together, and thank you for the Friends of group and other concerned bodies for giving a very strong voice to local people. Free to use sports facilities in parks are, a very essential requirement at the best of times, and the cost of living crisis has certainly deepened this need. Without a crystal ball, it's going to be very, very hard to say whether the usage of the area would be lowered or increased by it being smaller but arguably a better quality. And as well as people that do not want the development, I have had several people contact me in support of it, particularly people that use the pump track, who I see regularly because I have a bicycle shop in the area. And there's 2 things that I'm being told by especially parents of young children using that part of the park, is that a toilet in that area and refreshments and somewhere to sit down would be good. And the other element was there have been security incidents that would be slightly addressed by the cameras that would be going in as part of the proposals, which haven't been mentioned. In terms of the commercialisation of public spaces, it's definitely something that we need to be concerned about and exert some control over, so it's not unbridled. But we are also trying to create a stronger local circular economy and jobs and paid for activities alongside free activities are part of the way we proceed with that. So unfortunately I can't sit here and say everyone I've spoken to in the ward is supportive or everyone is dismissive of this. It's a very mixed tapestry, but Cycling for All have been using that area for a very long time. The initial proposals weren't really workable from their end. I'm very pleased to see that there has been some movement from the proposers in terms of the design element, and if there is a way for us to a greater or lesser extent, have some cake and eat some cake, I would be supportive of that.
Thank you for your comments, Councillor. So now we're going to take item 8, the main item of business today, I think, the Parks Tennis Procurement Hillsborough activity. And this is going to be presented by Joe Pearce. Over to you for your presentation. And if we've missed the bits about where you've picked up on the comments, particularly from the last meeting, then feel free to draw our attention to that. And I'm also interested, to what extent there are 3 legs to this. There's a guarantee, an operating agreement and a lease. And without going into part 2, to what extent you can tell us about how those 3 operate together, I think it would be important. So over to you.
Okay, thank you. And thank you to the friends coming today. And cycling for all. We met in March, and as we've alluded to, it generated a lot of discussion. The decision was deferred, and trying to focus on the positives. Actually, that was a really allowed us a beneficial pause. And there were 4 key elements that came through that discussion in March. These were, as we've talked about, particularly through Councillor Dorndale was quite rightly sort of saying, the citizen space survey that had been previously carried out reached a predominantly adult audience. Being online, it's a little bit restrictive in its reach, which is a really fair point. So the key focus was around kind of children, young people engagement. So I wanted to spend a few minutes today describing what we've done since March around children, young people. As you say, cycling for all, a conclusion hadn't been reached, and I would say we're still there, but definitely, direction of travel is really positive. And it was less around kind of displacement of cycling for all, because actually we'd kind of come up with a possible option that they could be accommodated within a reduced size multi-use games area. Actually, their concern was more around the displacement of children and young people when they're on there. So, you rock up to the park in the summer holidays, there's 30 trikes set up. Where can I go and play football? Where can I go and play basketball? So it was more the displacement of young people and what we could do around that. As we've talked about, there was the question around whether the design was fixed. So, is this it, done deal, or are there things that could be done around that? And clearly the first 2 elements, the youth and children, young people engagement and the conversation with Cycling for All, informed that. And I feel like we've got a good update for you today. And then the 4th element was around kind of the deadlines on funding. Obviously we met, not obviously, but we met in April 22 at the Co-op exec. And a decision was taken to go into the procurement process. We're then into March, and we have 25,000 has been lost, which small in the grand scheme of things, but still it's £25,000. But the bigger issue for us at the minute is the 150,000 Sport England funding, which is links to the solicited Community Asset Fund bid, and that must be spent by the end of March 24. So I just propose to spend a few minutes to go through each of those items. And I think some will cover the Friends of Hillsborough's questions, but definitely not all. But what I would say, and hopefully similar to what the Friends have alluded to, is what came through the children and young people engagement was such a love for Hillsborough Park. We worked with the children involvement team within the council, kind of part encouraged by the committee at the last meeting, but equally it's a sensible thing to do. And they talked about making sure we did a user and a non-user survey, and we did do that, and no one completed the non-user survey, which from a Parks and Countryside perspective, we were so reaffirmed on the importance of parks and green spaces, and also how important a destination such as Hillsborough Park is to many local people, local children and young people. So we visited 3 local primary schools and Forge Valley Secondary School, as well as carried out sessions on site in the Easter holidays with the children and young people. We deliberately didn't do an online survey. We don't have the budget or ability to do something pretty mobile fancy within that timescale. So the recommendation from the children involvement team was to go out face to face and complete those surveys with the children and young people. So that's what we did. They helped us put a survey together. And, you know, Andy's point there around the aesthetics, yeah, you're not wrong. We've got a Google image of the current facility and we've got an architect illustrative picture of a possible, and you're not wrong, that is what it is. But other than us describing it, and the feedback in the previous charity meeting was that we hadn't made it clear enough that there was a reduction in size, we hadn't made it clear enough that there was a balance of free and charge for activities. So the steer was to make sure that from the children involvement team's perspective that we really kind of articulated that clearly so that people were able to make an informed decision. So we weren't misleading, we were being really transparent and open. And that's what we've tried to do. There were questions in there around the potential displacement of cycling for all. Having conducted some of the surveys myself, I can allude to it within the report which was written by the children involvement team. That's a fairly hypothetical scenario for kids to kind of comprehend. If you turn up in a summer holiday and you want to play football and if they're on there, what would you do? It is hypothetical, I get that. I think from the insight that we got, what the sense was, there's so much more in that park that they go to than just the tarmac sports area. Actually, that's something quite far down in contrast to the pump track that comes up really highly as something that's really important to people. But also recognition, as Andy said, it is well used. We also did some mugger observation data with staff on site that demonstrated it is used. So we're absolutely not arguing with that at all. There's peak times that you'd expect in holiday periods and times that may clash with cycling for all. But what came through from the children and young people is they'd rather be playing football, some of them, on grass. So we need to sort out football goals within the wider park. The playground, there's some improvements could be made there. The cafe, a lot of them might not step foot in the cafe. It's a lovely venue, but it might not be something that they feel is for them. And some of the feedback from children and people is the tarmac sports area is not a place that they would go. It was not necessarily a space that offered something for them. So on the whole, the engagement piece infused and inspired and made us feel the figures were 80-something% in support. Some saying, no, keep it as it is, around 7%, I believe. And there was a quote there. I remember chatting to a girl said, I just like it because it's big and open. And, you know, that there is that feeling. There was also a lot of kids, an overwhelming majority who said, I'd love to do that, I'd love to try that. And the price point conversation came into that. So the, I'm just checking if the key points have been kind of covered off there. So in terms of numbers, there was 190 children that we spoke to during that time, and I think the key points. Yeah, the schools that we visited within the local area, obviously, and all of those guys visited the Hillsborough Park, as well as other parks, but that was their local park. That kind of whole host of information, we provided the spreadsheet that provided that data, sent over to the Friends of Group as well as the Charity Committee and Cycling for All. Led us into the conversations, although we'd started those with Sheffield Cycling for All, to see, well, how could that design be altered to not only accommodate them, but accommodate multiple users. Because that's really the essence of what we're trying to do here, and came through from the children and young people, is that space accommodates a group of predominantly, not always, there are families without a doubt, but more males, more people playing basketball and football than anything else. So how can we change a space to enable lots of people, underrepresented, people we need to work harder to engage, sometimes women and girls, sometimes, you know, less football, basketball focused kids. Actually a space just to hang out came up really important. And we're focusing a lot on kind of this loss of mugger space, and to put it in kind of dimension size, the current mugger is just over 2,000 square footage. The proposal of the multi-use games area being revised with the outdoor court area equates to just still over 2,000 square feet, just less than the existing mugger. So in terms of free open space, albeit not as a fenced multi-use games area, is fairly comparable. On to the Sheffield Cycling for All discussion, and yeah, we're not quite there, but I think it's fair to say we're heading in the right direction. For those familiar with the site, and I know not everybody is, there's been the recent opening the last year of the all-wheels track, and that is absolutely buzzing. All ages, people using it in different ways. Next to the bumpy bit is the Learn to Ride area, which had been kind of previously talked about, but isn't big enough currently to accommodate Sheffield Cycling for All. And it was one of the kids had said, well, why don't they bike on that bit? You know, and how come that isn't used? It's a dedicated cycle space. So we've started the conversation to say, well, could that be reconfigured? Could we reduce the tennis court boundary slightly, kind of taking it in a little bit, to be able to extend the Learn to Ride area, mean that that would be a space that Cycling for All would be able to use, and it is a dedicated cycle area for cycling rather than cycling on a ball sports or a multi-sports space. Is that something that could be doable? Absolutely. You know, empathise, because I know it's all been quite, well, we've been talking about discussions in the last few weeks, really. You know, it's emerging insight. It seems like a no-brainer, but obviously there's been a lot to kind of work through. So I wouldn't say it's absolutely nailed on, but it feels like an option. Access Sport, British Cycling, others have had conversations with, you know, needs to work through what that might look like, and from local councillors' conversations, definitely felt like the design compromise that could really work for the site, regardless really, that would provide safe, dedicated ball activity use, safe, dedicated cycling use on an area designed for cycling. So that's where we're at. It isn't nailed on in terms of design, but it is far kind of further progressed than we were at the last meeting. And our proposal would be in advance of planning, a planning application. If we got to that, we would work with Cycling for All, Access Sport, you know, to ensure that that design really worked for as many users as possible. Acknowledging not everybody is going to be happy, but we've definitely, I think, demonstrated a way of achieving more for multiple groups in that space. In terms of the funding deadlines, I think I've probably mentioned that you know, we are beyond the point here, really, in terms of the solicited Community Asset Fund from Sport England. That came off the back of the COVID pandemic, linked to the towards an Active Nation Sport England strategy. They're really keen to see active spaces in the outdoors, part of their active environment strand. Sheffield were offered a solicited bid because they could see the benefits of this, but we are getting beyond that. So spend by March next year. From an officer perspective, in terms of the decision, we'd be seeking a decision today as opposed to a deferral to September if that's the next meeting, as that would be too late for the project. Just to add as well, you know, well, I think we all are aware of where we're at as a council in terms of the Parks and Countryside Service, which is the bit I'm in. You know, we're asked and we're encouraged to actively seek opportunities to sustain our facilities, to develop them whilst, you know, facing budget pressure. We've got the opportunity to work with partners, national partners, Sports England, Lawn Tennis Association, a community interest charity, to bring around £1 million worth of investment into our facilities. And not only that, but to accommodate not just the usual people who may be able to use a facility like that, but reach people that I believe we should be working harder to reach in helping them get active. And yes, so I think I've pretty much concluded it. Do you want to just add that final point?
Sorry, I put Joe off there.
I can't multitask.
Sorry. But also just wanted to point out about the long-term maintenance of the tennis courts as well through this arrangement, which is something that the council prior to 2017 had not been able to afford to do as well. So the resurfacing of the courts and the booking system and so on becomes the responsibility of the provider rather than the operator, sorry, rather than the council, which is something that we would absolutely advocate for.
Yeah, and so thank you. Just one final point I wanted to make clear, because we referenced it in the report and it definitely came through within the conversations with children and young people, and it's referenced on both sides probably, the making space for girls. the presence and having staff on site has been something that was really well received. You know, having floodlights, having spaces organised in a different way would enable more people to be able to access that space, and that's not only come through from the national feedback which came through at the last meeting, but also through the conversations we've had with children and young people. Future.
Thank you for that. Can I just check one thing? You said a community interest charity. Are we dealing with a community interest company that's also a charity?
No, community interest company. Yeah, sorry.
So all the profits that the company makes go back into the development of,
I've seen that on the incorporation documents. Just one question from me, indulge me. At the end of all of this, you've lost £30,000 for good or ill. And the only thing I ever hear from capital delivery services, for example, is the cost of everything's doubling and tripling. Are you confident that you've got the money to deliver and the money to extend the mugger to the same size?
Yeah, so we've worked closely with our finance business partner to work through financial checks, due diligence on the company, as well as with the LTA and Sport England. The money from the council would be the 183 Section 106 funding and the prudential borrowing, which would be paid off by courtside CIC. So yes, we're satisfied.
And you're satisfied it's enough with building inflation?
that's what I was just going to say. Have we tested that against?
Yes, there's been checks on that in the obviously we have been going through, it's a fair point because we have been going through this for 2 years, but yes, we have checked that.
Right. Members, forgive me if I've jumped in there just to clarify those points, but questions from members? Douglas.
Yeah, I think Chair's prerogative to ask the first question there. I just want to focus on the big thing you said about the importance of consultation is the question that you asked. The question is, how could the design be altered in the light of what's being said? What's the answer to that question, though? What are the changes we've got today compared to the designs we had in March?
We've not shared it within the pack because we're still talking it through with Cycling for All, but Amanda, are you able to share on the screen? This is a current design iteration we've been working on, which highlights, the design changes can you see that? So what's different from that since when we came in March? If you see the Learn to Ride area on the left has been extended both south of the screen, which you can't see. Shall I point? I'll have to just shout. So if you see here, the Learn to Ride area will be expanded down here in line with the border of the existing pub track. I think it's around 4 metres, something like that, wasn't it? And then rather than this being one long fence here, what we noticed when we were at the pump track and how the young people and passengers are using this plateau here
Thank you. Any other? Do you want to come back, Douglas?
No, I think that's useful. Has that been shared with all the people it need to be shared with? No, we've not seen it before today.
Yeah, you've not seen it, but Rosemary, Cycling for All, other users, British Cycling, the local councillors, we shared that with them. So yeah, it will be shared after the meeting.
Okay, good, thanks. Yeah. And the other question I've got is just again about the funding. This 25k was the Investing for Growth Fund, wasn't it? What was that? Who's pulled out, in other words? Who's pulled out? Who's pulled out their 25k?
They've only pulled it out from a time perspective. I don't know the details about the funder, but they've just pulled out because the deadline passed.
Do we not know who it is?
I will have to check for detail. Obviously, that's linked with Courtside in terms of the funding would go to Courtside as opposed to us being the receiving body of the funding.
Okay, so it's not lost the council then. That's good news. All right. Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Councillor Belbin?
Thanks. I just wanted to ask, I know you've done some more work with Cycling for All, but I know some of the feedback I have when I went and visited the park was that actually Cycling for All quite enjoyed being mixed in with other park users and other users of the Mugger. So what thoughts have you had around ensuring that space continues to feel inclusive and that people aren't hived off, if you like, to different sections of the park was my first question.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And we were talking, because I think a long time ago there was an early conversation about could a space be cordoned off within the car park area, because the containers for the bikes and the trikes are held in the car park adjacent to Penistone Road. Actually, like say, being part of the hub is something really important. Also a toilet there, somewhere to sit. So the area and the space that we're talking about would kind of enable that as well, because it's there within the space. It's kind of metres away at the entrance of the path network as well. So I guess we don't see that as kind of the hub boundary isn't where the bottom of the Mugger is. Actually, it's that whole space is a hub. So I'd see them still being part of that.
And the new entrance would enable them to move smoothly through from one area to the other without them having to go out and go around as well. So it would be a separate space for them to use, but it would be easily accessible into that Mugger area and that outdoor space.
My other question was more around, and I know we have discussed this outside of the committee, but more around the overall process. So I think, we talked about how your team will go and, access funding for sports activities and so on. And I think, and then it flows into a local consultation. I'm just wondering about how, perhaps at an earlier stage in the process, we can involve the community in some of the decisions around some of the issues that actually may feel like citywide issues, because I appreciate you're coming from that perspective and it's a destination park, etc., and you're thinking about the hubs as well as the spoke. But, this does have a real impact on local communities when it comes to using local park facilities. So my impression with this process is that the local area committee weren't particularly involved, and I do think that would be a more useful way in the future to be able to engage with local communities in a whole range of different organisations. So I just wondered if you could comment on that. Thanks.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. I think the reason that that's happened in this case is this project has been talked about now since 2016, and I think it's evolved, and I think the LACs have come in and the project's continued, and then tram lines has happened, and then the pump tracks happened, and all these things have happened subsequently to the first conversations that we had around tennis way back in 2016-17. It's just taken so long for us to get us here, but I acknowledge your points about local area committees and that consultation that was done really early on, and then we waited until we did more consultation. So I think you've made absolutely fair points there, Councillor Belbin. Things have overtaken this project somewhat, and I think if we were starting from scratch now, we would be doing it in exactly the way that you've described with local area committees and local councillors.
And can I just check, I think the report, which I can't find in the report now, but it refers to a Hillsborough Park plan or future planning, and has that been developed with local councils, local area committee and local organisations, or you know, how has that plan been developed, and does it link to the community plan for the local area committee?
So I'll bring Jo in to talk a little bit more about that. Again, the Hillsborough Park vision was consulted on some time ago now, 2021. So I'm just looking at my colleague Stuart, 2021. But again, as local area committees have been introduced and councillors have changed and other things have happened, we've probably not kept up to speed with that as much as we would have liked to have done so. But it was shared and it was consulted on, and there was actually quite a significant response to the Hillsborough Park vision. The tennis hub was part of that vision, I believe, at the time, although it has changed significantly since then, particularly as the lodge it was refurbished through Age UK and the new cafe, so that had to rethink things as well. So this has evolved and other things have happened, but we absolutely did consult on that vision back in 2020, 2021 with all the stakeholders that you would imagine.
And just my last question, sorry. Just moving on, I suppose, from Councillor Johnson's question about what's changed since the last meeting, it's clear, you know, there is still some evolution going on with the plan. So in terms of what we're being asked to agree today, I suppose how much scope is there for further developments with the plan to make sure it does fit with, you know, the needs of everybody involved?
It is subject to planning consent as well, so that planning approval has to be sought, and there will be further consultation, but through the planning process as well, on the actual design and a place for comments there. So I think the original decision that came to the committee was to appoint and actually go ahead through the procurement with the community interest company. That was the decision that led to this, you know, discussion, which is brilliant. The next phase after that would be to apply for planning consent for the proposal and submit the detailed designs for the proposal and comment from there.
So I wonder if I may remind officers, in the end, we're not just talking about Hillsborough Park. There are all the other parks that I mentioned that are involved in this with different range of opinions. It's important that if we were minded to move this on, that, you know, a definite effort is made to get some sort of comment beyond just perhaps beyond just a public notice. I mean, where in a planning act we often get people saying things about, well, we haven't had notice and all the rest of it. So we're better erring on the side of encouraging engagement than not. At the annual meeting of the council, Councillor Auckland, particular hobby horse of that charitable decisions should be made by local area committees. One of my fellow councillor colleagues stood up and said, well, it's all very well, but these were given for the interest of the city as a whole. But rather like Councillor Belbin, I tend to feel that those local interests can translate very well from people who know these parks well, much better than I would, and people who are accountable through the electorate, particularly as local councillors, that would translate better into us having a clearer understanding. Not a universal view, I think, but it's something that is being considered by the governance committee, for which I'm grateful, and I think you chair it, don't you, Fran? So that would be helpful. We're being asked to approve something under section 119212 of the Charities Act 2011. Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's.
I'm out of practice, you see.
You're doing a great job, sir.
Oh, I don't know.
I mean, the dilemma to me is twofold. Firstly, the Friends of Hillsborough Park have, in good faith, carried out their own consultation and come up with one set of opinions. The officers, at the request of the committee last time, have extended the consultation and come up with another set of opinions. So how do you judge which is the better opinions or the more listen to opinions. Well, I don't think you can. I think you just have to take them both on board. And for me, the big issue coming out of the last committee meeting was the fate of the cycling. So much of this revolves around the fate of the cycling, because that's a fantastic facility for disadvantaged people. And I think the journey you're taking is definitely the right direction. I hope we can get a little bit further, but certainly I think that's the way to be going. I think as a broader picture, a couple of things spring to mind. Firstly, it's Hillsborough Park, but it's the Sheffield Park as well. And that we have these parks around the city. I recently attended a school council meeting at Forge Valley where myself and my Stannington Council colleagues were presented with a consultation. And what came out of it was that 80% of children in Stannington who attend Forge Valley School go to Hillsborough Park. Because sadly, we don't have very good playgrounds in Stannington. And to them, Hillsborough Park is an oasis in the desert, and they love it. And they go there for a whole range of things. Some of them just go there to socialise because, on days like today, it's a nice place to sit down on the grass and just talk to your friends. So we have to be careful that it's not. We have to respect the local members and the local residents' opinions, but we also have to take a slightly broader view of what we're doing with these parks. The other aspect of this, which I think is critically important, is in the finances, it's self-funding. We're not going to get back into the situation we currently find ourselves across the city, where things are falling apart because nobody's put the money into it for whatever reason. I'm reminded, when I was reading the papers, and bear with me, when I was a very little boy, I lived in South Wales in a very average little town of about 25,000 people. And at the centre of it was this magnificent park. It had, I'm not saying it's a first-class cricket pitch, but it's damn near just about there. It had its own little pitch and putt. It had its own green bowls. It was the centre of the community. It had a staff of 8 for one park. And I know that because my cousin went on to become the head park keeper. Those days are gone. I'm not sure we've got 8 people in our entire team, have we? No. So we have to think about different ways of funding the vital facilities of the parks. But that doesn't mean it's just chasing the dollar at the expense of the character of our existing parks. So it's a balancing act. Both have got to be done. I personally, it's my opinion, think this is going to be a great asset if we can agree it, especially if we sort out the last bits around bikes. I will support this on what I've heard today, but it's clearly up to you guys.
Thank you, Richard. And it was just to come back on the earlier point about other parks. Obviously, it has been very Hillsborough focused, and it was just to revisit an earlier point that might have not been talked about since the Co-op exec. We had the opportunity to just put out the hub at Hillsborough. We didn't want to do that because what we didn't want to happen in 5 years' time was that High Hazels or Ecclesfield or Graves Park are just left because, the hub has the opportunity to kind of strengthen that. There will be more staff able to employ. It provides that kind of presence that we've not got in other sites. So we deliberately didn't put it out as a hub only and left the tennis courts. We put it up as one package. In March, we, and obviously Andy's got some correspondence to say there hasn't been communication. We have communicated with friends of groups and local councillors through our area managers. We've got, I'm just looking through responses from Ecclesfield, Graves, and in the southeast. We clearly need to revisit that if people are saying there's not, but that communication has happened, and it was just to kind of add a bit of a surety to that.
So, sorry, yeah, lots of questions. Just clarify. As far as I can tell, on all the other parks, there's no issue, no downsides, nothing we should be aware of, is there? Obviously, in Hillsborough Park, there is an issue which we're discussing, but on the other parks, there's no negatives for any of the users of the park or anything like that, is there?
It's just a continuation, but as we've alluded to, it's on a longer term arrangement than the current arrangement. There's also 2 new sites added in, Ecclesfield and Hollands End Park, and new sites have been brought in by additional funding separate to this from the Lawn Tennis Association.
Yeah, that's good news. Because I mean, as I said, you know, there's, yeah, all sounds good to have these sort of upgrades of facilities in parks, you know, if it's not for the displacement. It does, of course, bring us back to the current displacement issues. I mean, as Richard said, you know, there's a big issue about, you know, Cycling for All, that particular project. You know, we've had the feedback from them where the majority of their users still don't support this. So I was asking about whether they've seen the latest designs. But I think, on the other hand, you're closer than we were in March, where there was quite a bit of a standoff in a way. Again, repeat the question about when I was in March. How much longer will it take to be able to just finalise that, see if we can actually get actual agreement with the Cycling for All group? I mean, it's always good if we can get people who use the park to be actually happy with what's proposed for the park.
I don't want to speak for Rosemary, who sat here from Cycling for All. It's probably not appropriate for me to say it's going to be this long. I think we're close. Yeah.
I mean, I'm just wondering how much, you know, whether we can get something done that we can actually be happy with signing off. I mean, at the moment, you know, we've got this, you know, we've still got the Friends group who's made it clear that they're, you know, not supportive of it. And I do have another question about the youth engagement team, because at the March meeting, we were asking about the youth engagement team. And I know that you've done some work with school children through the children's involvement team. But there's nothing through the youth engagement team, which is Chelsea Renahan's service.
So the children involvement team support services across the council with the children's voices. So although it's children and young people, a lot around the care side of the service at the council. So it's a kind of, not consultancy, but it's that advice to other officers. Obviously the youth service are, you know, frontline youth workers, and so we've designed it with the body within the council that do that.
Children and young people.
Well, kind of my point is that it haven't. So, I mean, Children's Involvement Service, I mean, it's 2/3 primary school children, isn't it, and then 1/3 up to 15. So it's very much about children in the park, as opposed to young people who might still be in school, but equally might be sort of older teens or whatever. I was just asking just because a colleague checked out. So Sarah Stevens is the Youth Voice and Influence Manager in the Youth Service in the Council. So part of the Youth Engagement team, which we specifically talked about at the last meeting. And she says, you know, to date we haven't been asked to consult with young residents in relation to the Hillsborough Park tennis hub plans. And I just wondered whether, yeah, why has that not happened? I mean, it was, you know, something that was really identified at the last meeting, requested. We kind of assumed that was going to happen. Why not? Is there any way to actually get some involvement with those people outside of a school setting, but who are going to be impacted by this, presumably?
Yeah, I was just going to reiterate that Joe and the team did have around 500 and just short of 600 discussions at Forge Valley Secondary School. And the children's involvement team doesn't just work with a certain age group, they work with children and young people of all ages. And they're the overarching team that you would go to discuss as officers with children and young people. They went to secondary schools. They also engaged with young people, children and young people on the site at Hillsborough as well. So I think in the short space of time since the March meeting, they've talked to quite a lot of children and young people through secondary and primary schools.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that's happened. The results are there. I mean, I've read the report. You know, it looks like a good piece of work. The results come back, it's equivocal because it recognises that, say, yes, new facilities, but perhaps haven't grasped the fact that they would lose, you know, quite the big tarmac area, which was identified as something they also liked. But there just hasn't been any engagement with our own youth engagement service. And I just wonder if that's going to be acknowledged, really, or whether it's something that should be done. I mean, seriously, what do we think here?
I'd say we spoke to young people and children within a school, within a secondary school setting and on site. So whichever team we spoke to, we have engaged children and young people, which was the ask of the last committee. On site, it's a mix. There's year 6 kids down there biking on their own, coming to the park, talking to teenagers on their own. It was a mixed group, and you see that from the mugger usage data as well. Yes, primary schools, we focus on the older age of primary schools, so as we saw from the sessions on site, that actually year 5s and 6s are down there on their own or with families. Younger than that, they're not. So we weren't turning away younger ones within the school councils, but we were focusing on the older age of primary, and then Forge Valley, the wider data, as Richard refers to, and then also the school council there.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so, Richard?
Sorry. I mean, I think, if I can help, in the last meeting we had, Councillor Dale was very concerned that the consultation had been with college kids. And her point made well was that a lot of cohorts never get to go to college. So I think that's one of the reasons why she wanted a wider consultation. And as far as I'm concerned, I would say, I'm not going to say 100%, but 99% of children and young people who attend youth services probably go to school. So you're picking them up one way or the other. I think it's more important you pick the individuals up rather than in the context they're picked up in. Thank you.
So I've got a question for Sarah. I was making some inquiries about the Charities Act 2011, section 119 to 121, which is where we give notice, and also that we're relying on a power in something called the Section 6 of the Trust of Lands and Appointment of Trustees Act 1996. And I've had a reply from one of your legal colleagues that it does not mean that the trustees of designated land can act with impunity, and before any disposal goes ahead they should be satisfied on the basis of financial reports and hearing the objections of the public, and the objections come to us if there is any that there is any disposal, if there is any disposal, that it is in the best interests of on balance in the best interests of the trust. And so, as we recommended on that particular one to take action under that act and those acts with that power, that is a good power and a serious power and not something to be entered into as a box ticking exercise. It's legally sound. The other thing I wanted to observe is personally I think that the actual legal bit of this is okay. Not so I agree with the judge and agree with the decision and was particularly happy with it at all, but Friends of Grace Park did take a legal action about Cobner Cottage, and I've got to say it was fairly comprehensively lost, sadly, from my point of view, but that's what the judge said, various things about it. So, I'd like an assurance that it is a solid power, and one that, as far as I know from discussions, members are going to take seriously, because I did have a discussion where I said, well, I think this is, whether I like it or not particularly, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not the judge, but it seems like we're taking the right course legally, oh, well, if you agree to that, you're just going to give the land away anyway. And I don't want people to go away and think that. I've not, in any discussion with members, whatever, about this, had that opinion expressed that, we're just here to just get on with it. A predecessor in your department said to me once, well, Ian, we have to take notice of what these people say, but we have to listen to what these people have to say, but we don't have to take any notice of them. And I think the council's changed a lot since that remark was directed in my way. We not only do we have to listen to what you've got to say, we're here to take notice as well, and I think we want that to be here loud and clear. Thanks.
Councillor, and I just want to reassure yourself and as chair and other members of this committee that we absolutely hear what you're saying, and we genuinely, I hope that this has demonstrated, you know, not everyone is in agreement, and I understand that, but where we do get feedback, we act on that feedback and we try and make the best of, you know, proposals, and we try and work with interested parties, and all the charitable objects say that any kind of disposal has to be for the betterment of the park itself and for the recreational purposes, and that is where we actually come as a starting point, is always for the betterment of the park and for the people that use it. And I hope that there is some evidence historically since Cobner Cottage that, you know, we've only done things that we believe are in the betterment of the parks. So. And not done some things as well because of it. So I just want to give you the assurance that I'm hearing you loud and clear, and I'm sure my team will work to adhere to that that guidance.
Well, just to add to this, I mean, the council's gone through a bit of an upheaval in these last few years, so the change of the committee system and changes in the leadership. So let me give you a quote from Lenin. There are decades when nothing happens, and there are weeks when decades happen. Perhaps we're in that moment when, in weeks, decades might be happening. Bear that in mind. So, we have a recommendation, and I have some amendments to the recommendation, which I would like to mention and see what our legal advisor has to say about it. The first thing is, even though I'm told it makes no difference, it does often in conversation, so I'd like to renumber the recommendations. Leave recommendation 1 as it is. Make the authorising of giving of notices recommendation 2. Make subject to the outcome of recommendation 2. So make recommendation 5 recommendation 3. And then they would then be subject to the outcome of recommendation 2 to approve, etc. Make recommendation 4 to approve the award of the contract, and make recommendation 5, approve the use of prudential borrowing. Now, I'd like to add to the new recommendation 3.
Chair, before you say those, can I just ask you to clarify that order again, just to make sure I've got them?
Oh, I'm sorry, yes.
Thank
1.
you. Yeah.
Notes the report.
Yeah.
Remove the words endorse. I think the feeling is that if we're going to ask people to be consulted, and before we've consulted them, we're endorsing something, it sounds a bit preemptive. So I'd take that out. 2. Authorise the giving of notices. 3, which is the old recommendation 5. Subject to the outcome of recommendation 2, the one about giving notice, blah, 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 to approve the grant of raise. 4, approve the award of the contract to the preferred supplier. 5, approve the use of prudential borrowing, section 106 money to support the project. Now, originally I scribbled down as so far as required by the Charities Acts, but I'm told that everything in this report is just about charitable parks, and that we're the bodies to make the decision. I think that's what at any rate I was told. So I would like to suggest that we add to recommendations 3, 4 and 5, subject to the outcome of recommendation 2. This is all about emphasising that the giving of notice and opening it up to representation is a serious matter that we want to see done and brought back to the committee. Remember, the order in which the recommendations change doesn't actually apparently make a difference, but it makes a difference to how it reads to the public, I think. Add to recommendation 1, we take out endorse, and add a recommendation. request the Communities, Parks and Leisure Policy Committee to reaffirm the previously taken decision of the cooperative executive in respect of, and it's in respect of Parks, Tennis Procurement and Hillsborough Activity Hub, assuming it had the same wording at cooperative executive. Well, I understand it sailed through cooperative executive at the time, so just to get the wording right. I'd like us also to, in some way, note Sarah's advice about that we note that before any disposal goes ahead, we should be satisfied on the basis of financial reports and hearing objections of the public that if there is any disposal, on balance it is in the, if there is any objections to a disposal, that disposal is it on balance in the best interest of the trust. And finally, in that to add that we'd like a proper report, we'd welcome representation in our September meeting about this matter. Hopefully by then there won't be any. Because there will be a landing ground on extending the mugger, which you've talked about, that people are happy with the investment. No, probably not in that detail. What I'm trying to drive at here is basically you're improving the tennis service. Your objective of improving the tennis provision, of tackling deprivation and the deficit in sports take-up, I don't think none of us are going to disagree with that. So that objective there, but you've got to convince people to some extent that at least they can go along with it. That's what we're driving at here. So, if that's legal and correct, that's how I'd like to proceed. But go on, you've got a question.
I just want to clarify really, because I'm
remember our other alternative, which has been discussed, is another deferment.
No, I know.
No,
I
don't think you want another deferment.
I'm just checking my understanding of what you've just said, Councillor Auckland, if that's okay. And maybe it's a question for Sarah. So recommend one was to take out the word indoors. Recommendation 2 was to approve the award of the contract to the preferred bidder. The preferred supplier. And then number 4 was giving of notices, and I wanted to check whether or not we could give the notices before we awarded the contract to the preferred supplier, just as a chronological point.
It affects our
I think, Chair, Lisa's question is a practical one rather than a legal one in terms of the order of the decision. I think, and this was a point I wanted to clarify with you, you asked if they were legal, what your intention was in terms of when you take this decision.
Right. So right. The chronology sort of like I think matters in terms of how it's stacking up in members' minds. Yeah, and we want the notice to be given, and we want the opportunity for people to make representation. And I recommend to members that we take the petition that's been presented and the presentation, which you may not have seen, but we've received a presentation from the Friends of Hillsborough Park, that is taken as your first notice of objection, because we've seen that, and that so we're going to publish the notice, take representation if any is received. You're going to try and level off on objections and overcome them as far as you can and you report back, and there may be other responses. Yeah, if you want to, in amongst that, continue with approving the award of a contract and the approval of prudential borrowing, you can, because that's in the recommendation, but don't take it for granted by any means that come September we're going to say, hang on, yeah, we're happy with the outcome. Frankly, I don't think we know that from the discussion that's gone on. It matters, the notice period. So you've got to say to your funders, yeah, we're getting on with this, but we have this formality to go through, and it's not just a formality in terms of members are content to say, fine.
Okay.
It's not a done deal, that part of it. We are going to consider what may or may not come out of giving notice under the Trustee Act and the Charities Act.
Okay. So in terms of the
You've said how seriously you're going to take it. So how you work it out, but take it seriously.
Okay, so proceeding with the recommendations, subject to the notices going out and subject to the representations that come back with that notice on both the awarding of the contract and of the disposal notice for the leases for the tennis courts. Is that correct?
Okay, first of all...
Sorry, I pressed my microphone. Yes, of course.
Thank you. Okay, there is a bit of procedure to be followed today, first of all. So the office has put forward recommendations. Yes. Chair, you're proposing some amendments to those. You need you're making a proposal, you'll need a seconder. If that's agreed, then the committee then has to vote on those amended recommendations. What I think is being proposed, and I want to check that all members are on the same basis, is that the contract could be awarded, but is always subject to the fact that you will be taking a decision based on the representations that may be received in relation to the notices, and therefore if the contract would bind us in, if that subsequently doesn't get granted and therefore we can't dispose of the land, then obviously that we'd have to work that out in terms of the contract. So I think the answer is you can only enter it if the committee voted that way. You could only enter into the contract if you're sure that that wouldn't cause a breach situation if subsequently the decision to dispose of the land wasn't confirmed effectively, because I understand the proposal that Chair is making is that that after the notices have been published, that would come back to this committee. Are you wanting, Chair, that it comes back to this committee whether or not there are representations?
I think that's a bit of a moot point because we've already had representation today, which I'm suggesting we take as representation in terms of the notice. Would that be the wish of friends of Hillsborough?
I'm guessing that would be wider because I think some of the other sides may want to make
representation. Okay. But yes, that is it. And also, so just on, I'm no lawyer here, but and I do need a seconder. But just to clarify before we look at that, is there's nothing wrong in contract law in having a term that is discernible and certain. There's nothing uncertain about what members are saying legally, is there? About subject to us making a hearing representation. If we're tying ourselves into something before we've heard representation, I don't think we want to do that.
No, that's fair enough, Chair. I think all I was saying is that the contract, I think we went out to tender, so that clause may not be in the contract currently, in which case we may wish to not enter into the contract until we're sure about the land disposal point. But also it might be that there's no point in awarding the contract because I don't know how much activity will be able to take place until that decision is confirmed or not, depending on the outcome of the consideration of those representations.
Yeah, but almost believe it or we are trying to be, I think members are trying to be fair as well to all the hard work that you've put in and your exhortation to us not to as it were make your life impossible but it's not guaranteed. Sorry, Councillor Melvin.
Chair, you also mentioned having the Communities Committee reaffirm the decision as well. Where does that fit in this cycle?
So the next CPL meeting is next week. I think we would, like, I want to say Monday, but it might be yes, I'm getting nods. So I think we would struggle to make that agenda, in which case the next meeting of the Communities, Parks and Leisure Committee is actually currently scheduled for after the next scheduled meeting of this committee. So we would have to look at how that worked in terms of when this decision came back, if that's something that members want to do. In relation to that specific part of the proposal, it is possible to ask Community Parks and Leisure to confirm or otherwise the previous commissioning decision, but that would be unusual. Normally it's taken that a decision of the council is binding and can be implemented unless there's been a change of circumstances or indeed a change of policy that means that a previous decision is no longer implementable. So it's possible to do it, but it would be unusual.
Yeah, but we've changed the governance system, we've changed the council leadership, we've changed the constitution. They're big changes. We've just had some elections. I think
something's ringing a bell. I think it's Mortimerly Close or something like that, where again we were picking up on the Communities, Parks and Leisure Committee was picking up on a previously made executive decision, and we were told then that we couldn't reaffirm it. We could merely knock it down if we were minded to. So I'm slightly confused. And the point, Chair, if I may, your desire to make these changes is to follow charity law, is that right? That the notice periods, make sure that we're being seen not to be paying lip service to them. And so, yeah. So in that respect, I think it should stay within the charity subcommittee. I don't see any benefit of putting this back to Communities, Parks and Leisure, because we haven't actually been taking decisions on this. It's the competent executive, and then it was the charity subcommittee.
Okay.
Councillor Williams is correct in the sense that, yes, the decision, you effectively would take the decision not to overturn the previous decision. And it would be unusual for officers to put a report to a committee saying, please don't overturn the previous decision. But obviously in this case, the chair is suggesting a referral from this committee. The Communities, Parks and Leisure Committee could say it doesn't want to even consider that as an item because it's not something it's considering doing. It would be unusual.
In this case, I invite views on that particular part. Councillor Johnson.
So a couple of things, yeah. I mean, first of all, I've already said previously that, I think actually this proposal will be better endorsed by the Community Parks and Leisure Committee because it's a full policy committee of the council that should be looking at the decision that affects multiple parks here right across the city. And, frankly, a better place than this kind of ad hoc committee that really should be reserved for looking just at the issues about protection of a specific charity. Because the role of this committee is to make sure that the charity's interests are safeguarded against the ravages of, the evil Parks Department or whatever, and it's where the council has an internal conflict of interest there. So if we're taking it seriously, that is the role that we have here, but actually it should be a Parks Committee issue. But I've said that before. I did want to ask a question for Sarah, really, it's legal one. So it is about what happens after notice. So you've identified, page 30 is sort of second from bottom paragraph unnumbered, and so it's identifying that if we go ahead with this, we have to give notice under section 121 of the Charities Act, and that gives a month for anyone presumably to lodge their objections to the disposal for the 25-year lease. And then it says, and those representations have been considered. So my question is really, how do we as a council consider those objections? Is that a role of this committee? Meaning that we'd have to have those presented to us at one of these meetings before we could proceed.
If you don't delegate that down to officers, then yes. If there are representations received, they have to be considered by the people who are acting as the charity, and at the moment that is set here by the Constitution. So for each of those separate charities and each of those separate disposals, you have to this committee would have to consider the representations in relation to each of those and make a final decision on disposal.
I think that's what we wanted to do. Yeah? Yeah, okay, yeah, that's what we wanted to do.
Probably appropriate then.
Just to be clear, this is seconding that the proposal to the amendments in order that you suggested, and I'm sorry, I've lost where we are on whether it goes to communities, parks and leisure, which I think Councillor Johnson.
Well, I would support that, so I'd
Look, hopeless, I'll say on the microphone because I keep forgetting to press the microphone. Look, I thought that was the correct process in terms of making the right decision because it's a policy matter, exactly as Councillor Johnson has said. But I'm sort of like, I'm not going to necessarily die in a ditch for those words. Personally, I've proposed them. If somebody doesn't want to propose them, that's all right. What I'm hearing, I believe, is it's feasible for it to come back. And I totally accept it's an unusual process. But, you know, I've been here a while.
Councillor, I think Joe's got
Yeah, thank you. I mean, notwithstanding what Douglas says, I just don't think there's a need to bring it back to the charity, to the community parks and leisure. The decision's been made. It's not materially changed. The key things are the charities elements, as I said before, and I think it should stick within this. You know, it's not a policy. It's now we've moved beyond the policy. The policy was set by the corporate executive. We're not being asked to look at the design or whatever, things like that. That's all been done to a large extent with a few tweaks. To me, this is charities and charities law, charity guidelines, and it's stick within this group.
Chair, I wonder if when we receive representations after the deadline, if we analyse them and pull together a summary and send that to you as chair of this committee and in a report, and then maybe decide whether you want to bring them back or not.
That's not an option.
Is it not?
No. Because the chair can't make a decision. There's no delegated decision
It either
making.
comes back or it...
Either the committee agreed to delegate it to an officer,
right,
or it comes back unless there are no representations.
Right.
I think that's what we want. As far as I know, trustees can't delegate vaguely. We need to make that decision. But I think that's what members want. I mean, I'm sure you'll do a report for us. And that, okay.
Can I just add on the CPL point in terms of the amendments, because we had talked about this previously after the Corp Exec. We arranged a visit on site and had the kind of legal clarity around what would that decision be, because ultimately the decision for this needs to sit here. So it was almost agreed and endorsed from Richard as chair that we organised a session, kept informed, but the matters were dealt with here. If it was to go to September, in terms of CPL for information, and we were still awaiting something to continue, that would halt the project from a funding perspective. So
Okay.
I would suggest from CPL perspective.
Well, this doesn't get anywhere till I get a seconder. So,
Is there anyone who's prepared to second
Yeah.
all of Councillor Auckland's amendments? That just means you vote on it. That's you're not agreeing to anything. Is anyone happy with all of the amendments proposed by Councillor Auckland? would the Councillor Johnson?
Well, let's try and come together. Is the stumbling block here the request to refer it on? Is that the stumbling block? Because we're going to hear the objections, if there are any, anyway. So maybe that was a little bit of overclone. And we know Richard Douglas have been on this before. Until about 10 days ago, I didn't even want to touch this job. It's just, you know, it's been straight with people. You saw me in front of 200 people. You said, Douglas, at that meeting in Graves Park, Sheffield could put you on this committee. And I said, nah, I don't want to touch it. No, I want to abolish it. You know, that is the truth of the matter. So we are going to hear it. So maybe it would make sense to remove that bit about community parks and leisure, because we're going to decide it anyway. You lot are all pretty high-powered. I'm just a backbencher.
Can I ask another question? I'm just trying to be clear what we're trying to achieve, really, I think. I mean, I can see there's potentially a case for we're still not quite there on design and so on, and give some chance for there to come to a more mutual agreement about the design that might involve the mugger and so on, and then it's a question of where the final decision comes on, if you like. I can see there's a case for doing that, though I don't want to keep deferring, but that to me would seem to be a reasonable outcome of the meeting today. To some extent, we've already heard the objections and so on. It's not a case of just continuing to rehearse the same debate, but it feels like we've got a little bit further to go in terms of design, and if that's the case, I'd quite like that to allow that to happen before coming to a final decision. Where that final decision is made sounds to me as if it should be here then, in which case I'm not sure there's any point in any referral to communities.
Let's in the interest of this working together, drop that bit. All right. We drop that bit. Richard, you're spared, and your committee. At the moment, because Tom got to say, on that basis, Fran, are you willing to second the proposal?
Okay, so I think then, Chair, the proposal, I've taken the liberty of inserting your request about legal advice. Yeah. So I think the amendment that you're proposing is that the recommendations be as follows. Note the contents of the report. Yep. Note the legal advice received. Yep. That decision will be taken on the having considered any representations and on the balance of best interests, on the balance that it's the best interests of the trust. Authorise giving notices under the Local Government Act 1972 and the Charities Act 2011 prior to the disposal of any of the properties required for the delivery of the project.
Sorry, what was two?
Note the legal advice.
Oh, two. You've made the legal advice a separate. Yep.
Yeah,
fine.
Is that okay?
Yeah. 3
was the giving of the notices. 4, subject to the outcome of the process envisaged by 3, to approve the grant of the leases of the properties, and then it continues as it was worded previously. Yeah. And then the next one would be, again, subject to the outcome of the process envisaged by recommendation 3, approve the award of the contract to the preferred supplier. And finally, subject to the outcomes of process envisaged by recommendation 3, approve the use of prudential borrowing in section 106 money to support the project.
Yeah. I think that is exactly
That's
it.
What you've proposed and what Councillor Belvin has seconded.
Yes. Okay. So there's a bit here about basically, is it? Yeah.
Question. On the assumption that we go with that, if there's no unintended consequences for the officers?
Richard, there's no unintended consequences in what I'm saying, and I don't think there are in what
I'm just asking the question.
Saying. I think.
Like, does that still give you scope within your time plans?
Well,
I don't know if Joe's going to say the same as me, but as long as we can put the notices out and bring the recommendations back pretty quickly, and so we don't have to wait. I don't know when the next meeting of this committee is.
Next scheduled meeting's the 4th of September.
That would be a problem from a funding perspective, but we knew there was always going to be the open space notice process that would come in. So in a way, it's kind of, that will accelerate that process starting. As I understand it, this meeting can be called as required. So could it not be that that ball has started rolling with the open space notice, and then a meeting is called after that month period? So really, those things are kind of happening alongside each other.
That would be the request.
I don't know, because normally when we've got a proposal and seconder, we'll proceed to a vote. But I'm trying to interpret here. But how you do it is up to you. I mean, I don't know whether, subject to contract, you can progress negotiations and explain to your partners what the situation is, so long as they're clear that we are giving notice and considering notices might be received seriously.
Thanks, Councillor. We will take some advice on the best way to proceed.
It's up to you.
Thank you.
How you manage it through.
I think, Chair, if without it changing, it doesn't change your proposal and your seconding. I think if the officers were subsequently to discover that the 4th of September would be too late, they could approach you and the monitoring officer to agree to an extraordinary meeting.
So, exactly as you were saying, in the Constitution it says we meet as and when required. I mean, I could make today was almost not quite as and when I would have required, because as members, we've tried our best to facilitate officers' discussions about this with us. We've bent over backwards, really. So, we'd be amenable to what you've got to say, but don't. Right, I've said it. The retired Councillor Sue Walton would be telling me to shut up at this point, so I'll be quiet. It's been proposed, it's been seconded. There is a recommendation. We've now got a recommendation as amended. Amendment's been proposed and seconded. I think, are people in favour of the amendment? We've got 2 votes here, aren't we? Those members in favour of the amendment, please show.
In favour of granting the amendment, I'll agree to that.
Right. So we now have a substantive motion as amended. I think duly seconded by Councillor Belvin. Duly seconded by Councillor Belvin. Is that unanimously agreed? Or is there dissent? No.
Yeah, well, I'll abstain on that. So I'm still not satisfied that the case is made out for that.
Okay, we note your abstention, Douglas, but otherwise it's carried.
Thank you, Chair.
Are we saying that at the end of the notice period, it will come back to this committee? It is not being delegated to officers?
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Do we want to do item 9 next, which looks the sale of Twentywell Lane? Looks fairly, before we get on to the work programme. So have we got somebody who's going to tell us perhaps briefly about number 9? Okay, would you like to come to the table and introduce yourself?
Good afternoon, I'm John Herman. I'm a senior surveyor with Regen and Property Services. I've come to present the report on Twentywell Lane and the recommendations contained in that report. Report presented seeks approval of the charity subcommittee acting as sole charitable trustees of an unregistered charitable trust to the sale of land off Twentywell Lane to the north side of Poynton Woods. The recommendations contained in the report are to approve the freehold sale of the trust land based on the terms of the report, subject to there being no representations.
And I'm sorry to interrupt you. Of course, we're not exactly trustees of the charity that's mentioned. The charity that's mentioned is the J.G. Graves Charitable Trust, the bit that gives grants out, really. So we've got a supplementary.
That's right, yeah. So there's an addendum to that report which has been provided, which provided an update on, I think it was point 1.7 of the original report, which in error stated the J.G. Graves Charitable Trust as being the owner of that land, which is not in fact correct. It's Sheffield City own that land. It was a donation effectively from the charity to the City Council to acquire that land at that time. So the City Council are the owner of that land and the sole charitable trustees of that unregistered charity. Okay. One of the further recommendations, just going back to the report, is on consideration of the qualified surveyor's report to confirm that the trustees are satisfied that the proposed terms are to the best and reasonably obtained in the circumstances, and then to authorise the Chief Property Officer to negotiate the terms of the sale of the trust land and instruct the Director of Legal and Governance to prepare and complete all necessary legal documentation in accordance with the agreed terms. The proposal relates to freehold disposal to Network Rail of unregistered charitable land of Twentywell Lane, and it's illustrated by coloured pink on the plan appended to the committee report at Appendix 1. It's worth adding that Network Rail are a statutory body and therefore have powers to compulsory purchase the land, and it can do so by agreement. And one thing also to add is that Network Rail have already secured a transport works order called the Hope Valley Capacity Scheme Order 2018 to take possession of the trust land and carry out the works authorised by the order. I think Councillor Auckland, you'll have been on site and noticed that some of those works are in fact taking place. So the works order does allow them temporary access to undertake the work. So if members have been out and visited the site, they would have obviously seen the works progressing. The land is located within an area open space designated by the Sheffield Unitary Development Plan. The total area of the land measured, which is the registered title of that land, is something like 38,800 square metres and is shown coloured green on the plan, which is attached to the addendum at figure 1, of which the trust land, the pink area which we're recommending for disposal, measures 1,499 square metres, and that's approximately 3.86% of that land. The trust land comprises of a rough area of hard standing and is used by the council for open storage and parking of maintenance vehicles when required. It's maintained by the Parks and Countryside Department. The land is required by Network Rail for the construction of a power supply point, which is effectively a substation, which will occupy an area of the pink land of approximately 250 square metres. Planning permission has been granted for the power supply point. Existing and proposed layouts are appended at the committee report at Appendix 2. The PSP, or the power supply point, will power signalling systems in the relation to the wider government-backed £145 million Hope Valley Capacity Scheme, which I mentioned is already under construction. Network Rail consider the land, the pink land, to be the most suitable location for the power supply point, given its proximity to the two neighbouring railway lines. The remaining trust land will be continued to be used for access by maintenance vehicles to the two adjoining railway lines, as well as the City Council's required access to that land also. Network Rail, as I mentioned, have rights of access to use the trust land to maintain the adjoining railway lines, and a public footpath does cross that land but will be unaffected by the proposals. The function of the open space will be unharmed by the power supply point. It only occupies a very small proportion of this land, and Network Rail is seeking to acquire that land by agreement and have offered to pay a sum of £25,000 to compensate the unregistered charity for loss of the land. This is in line with the qualified surveyor's report, again appended to the committee report at Appendix 3. Network Rail also proposed to make a further financial contribution of £9,200 so the council can make further improvements at Poynton Woods. These include new signage, footpath improvements, and ecological and archaeological surveys of Poynton Woods. It has also been agreed that the City Council shall keep the following rights, and that's a 3-metre wide right-of-way for all purposes through the trust land, and that's indicated by the hatching blue on Appendix 1, and also a right to establish a 4x4 metre storage compound and parking area for maintenance vehicles. So effectively, the City Council's use of the land will be maintained as is. Contribution of the power the power supply point will not harm the function of the trust land, the wider area of the open space or the existing public right-of-way, and the proposed sale will there not conflict with the objects of the charity. The sale will facilitate delivery of the Hope Valley capacity line, which has been designed to remove bottlenecks along the line for passenger trains, so they can overtake the slower freight trains. Sorry. Okay. There's specific improvements to the Door and Totley station. These include a construction of a second railway line, extension of the existing platform, construction of a second platform, and a construction of a footbridge and lift. The sale of the land will contribute to many principles and contribute particularly to environmental and social and economic elements of the corporate plan. The scheme will increase attractiveness of railway, encourage greater use, result in some model shift to the railway, helping support and drive net zero carbon emissions, and provide additional capacity, improving connectivity along the line, reliability and reasonable journey times. The proposal will support economic growth by encouraging more people to work, learn and visit Sheffield. The sale of the trust land will contribute to the charity objectives as follows: generate capital receipts retained by the charity and invested or used for the purpose of the charity objectives, provide a financial contribution enabling them to carry out the survey works, improve signage of the footpaths, etc. as disclosed earlier, and maintain the existing footpath. There has been consultation, there will be consultation through service of the Open Space and Charitable Land Act. They will be advertised 2 consecutive weeks in the local paper, and then there will be 1 month that requires for objections and representations to be made. Worth noting as well that there was extensive consultations undertaken as part of the Transport Works Order, and also as part of the planning process. Other options considered are effectively there aren't any because of the land is.
I'm really sorry. I think hopefully we've read the report. I think we've got that impression. But Councillor Johnson had a question.
Yep. So
off you go.
It wasn't a question. I was just going to say, if no objections to this, happy to support this. Certainly not on recommendation 1. I'm assuming if there are objections, they'll come back to this committee via public notices. On recommendation 2, we haven't had the qualified surveyor's report, so I don't think we can approve that. Not okay. All right. I've not got it then, so I'm perhaps not agreeing to that.
Another time we can agree on what qualifies as a qualification, but for now, the only thing I know, because I'm now prolonging it, is in 2000 I was briefed on Network Rail's plan to double the junction at Door, put the platform in, do the Hope Valley upgrade at a cost of £12.5 million. I suspect it's substantially north of £12.5 million in the ensuing 20 odd years. I've seen Network Rail with their consultation turn up and say they were going to have all this done by 31st of December 2020, possibly even before then, because they've consulted on it several times over. If they actually got some improvements to the rail network, that would be great, and perhaps not cut down as many trees as they have been doing, but they can go ahead and do that. So, are we unanimous on accepting this? Yes. Right, so agree the recommendations? Yes.
Thank you very much.
With going back to item 7, the work programme. So, Amanda's going to talk about the work programme.
Yes, thank you. I have circulated some hard copies. Apologies, this did not go out in advance. But this is a draft work programme to bring charity subcommittee a little bit more into line with some of the policy committees, so that you can see a forward plan of items that will be coming to committee. So there are no recommendations particularly to approve at this stage. This was just for information, and then perhaps at the next committee we'll be able to sort of look at it in more detail. But this is the first draft, just for our members to have sight of.
Thanks, Chair. I'm just looking at part 1. There's quite a few amendments on there. First part, cafe and nursery, removed from committee meeting. Can I just ask why it was removed, and has it gone to another policy committee?
It's not gone to another policy committee, it's gone to a later date, because the QSR and the property report, as John's just wasn't ready for this meeting.
So it's going to come in.
So it'll come back in, I think, September.
Yeah, no confirmed date.
Yeah.
We've just not got a date.
I believe, Councillor, it was just a timing issue. It was on the agenda originally, then and the draft, and then it came off. You would have, it's before you were appointed, but you would have seen it come on and go off.
Just to reassure you, Councillor, because it is a charity, it does have to come here.
Just general point. I think where we've got developments in particular areas, whether it's Firth Park or Aberthorn or whatever, I think really they are probably parks developments. They should go through the Communities, Parks and Leisure Committee as a policy thing. And really this committee should be dealing with the formalities that are necessary for a charity as a separate one. So it would mean things formally going through 2 committees, but it will probably save work overall, though not for Community, Parks and Leisure Committee.
So I don't know about anyone else, because of course we're a subcommittee of the Policy, Strategy and Resources. There's a programme committee. I tend to think, my initial thinking was, really we're here to decide, focus on the charity matters. But if something is entirely within the charity, then it's entirely within this committee's decision-making process. This is where it lies, is mine understanding. But it does bring me to the work programme issue that I've discussed informally with some of us. You know, I think we'd like some training to be organised about, you know, basically charity trustee duties. Some of us have been charity trustees in other capacities, but what's different about a local authority trust, really? It's certainly something, you know, when I said I'm told legally the council can't have two faces, I've been going around for ages, years in fact, saying, well, the council's got obligations as a charity trust, and these can be different. They won't always coincide with what the council wants to do corporately, and that it's perfectly reasonable to take a different view as a trust than as the corporate arm of the charity. So somewhere along the line, we might have one face legally, but we've probably got 2 sets of duties, which which hopefully they will coincide, but they may not. So I think we had training on there, things like, the granting of a scheme. So some things provide that you have to go to the Charity Commission for a scheme to make a disposal. Sometimes we're following this particular process here, which is slightly different, but it still involves giving the notice. What points of consideration should we make in determining, well, what's the difference? There's been a new Charities Act, which might give us potential, I think, because it talks about borrowing powers. It might give us potential to exploit favourably our capacity as charities. I mean, there might be laws that stop us doing it as local authorities, but maybe not. Maybe there's something in that. So a briefing on how the law might have changed on that act. Those sorts of things I think we would generally welcome, and fairly early on.
Yes, certainly, Chair, we can arrange that.
There is no other business, I think, I managed to get, with your help and cooperation, hopefully reasonably well to the end of this meeting. And I thank you for your kind attention and the officers for their hard work and for helping us get to acceptable recommendations, at least legally. Thank you.